Hello and welcome back to Anna Rose Reads the podcast. I am your host, Anna, and I am coming at you guys today with a bonus episode. I have an interview with Mr. TJ Payne. He is the author of a book that you all may know on the self-publishing and indie scene. It's a little novel called Intercepts, and it's a book that I've seen floating around for a really long time. But most importantly, it's been republished with a bigger press, and so it's on shelves in Barnes& and Noble now. So I get the chance to talk to TJ about self-publishing and traditional publishing. He's also a screenwriter, so we get the chance to talk about his screenwriting work versus writing fiction and so much more. I am so stoked that I got the chance to talk to him, and I'm getting the chance to share this interview with you all. I hope that you all enjoy, and I will catch up with you guys after. TJ, welcome to Anna Rose Reads. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you on the show. I feel like I've seen your book Intercepts around for a very long time, and for good reason, because it's been around for a little bit. But it's recently gotten a brand new life being republished, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, this book and its kind of second life. How's it been feeling for you? The book released last week, so how are things feeling?
It's thrilling. I went into this whole process. It was self-published back in 2019, so it's ancient by self-published standards. And it just got a traditional release, and I was so like the self-publishing route. I was always so excited to see people buy it and review it just as a self-published author. And I was like, I don't need to ever see it in a physical bookstore. I don't ever need to see people posting their physical copies on Instagram, but just to go around and walk into a store and see the book there.
Yeah.
And there is something, it's a very special, it's been a very special week.
Yeah, I can imagine so, and especially with a story like this, like you said, it's been since 2019. And when did you start to write the book? Like, was this something that like a story that you kind of like always had with you for a bit that you like finally put pen to paper and wrote, or was this just like in 2019, wham bam, we get you get it self-published, and now there's a second life now.
It was a long route I took
Yeah,
to self-publishing. I always wanted to be a screenwriter. That was the initial dream, was film and television.
yeah,
And so I came to Los Angeles after college. I got every job I could in the industry. I was a production assistant for a long time, which meant I was fetching coffee
yep,
for people. I got in with Rob Reiner's editing crew and worked with them for a long time. Just the nicest people. Rob was the sweetest man.
yeah,
And yeah, and I just kept writing screenplays, and they would go some places. They would get
yeah,
a little bit of momentum, and it wouldn't ever go anywhere. Nothing would ever make it to production. And that became really frustrating for me. And so one of the scripts that never even really went out wide was this facility with sensory deprivation that became Intercepts. And so I had a lot of the story elements there that just was never read by anyone. Just because of where I was at in my writing career and just the Hollywood system. So
yeah.
so I converted it into a book, and that process went very, very smooth and fast. And I threw it onto Amazon, and it just sort of kept churning its wheels and grinding out sales and just finding people.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've talked to like Nat Cassidy, who, he's written some of his short stories that were recently released in his collection were plays. And so I asked him, I was like, what is that process like of moving from the direction of like writing a play to writing a short story, with the same kind of elements. And I'm always curious with the same with screenplays because I know that there's a lot of direction and visual elements that sometimes I would think would maybe be easier to translate in the narrative format of a novel, and sometimes not so much. So I'm a little curious how that goes for you switching between those two mediums.
It is. It was definitely a challenge at first.
Hmm.
Screenplays, one of the hardest things was simply point of view, the
Yeah.
perspective. I write a lot in Third Limited, but screenplays are always from the point of view of the camera, ultimately.
Hmm.
So you can do things in film and TV, like you can have a family eating their breakfast and talking about nothing specific, and then cut to guys with guns outside the front door ready to burst in, and it just fuses everything in that dining room with more tension, even if they're not talking about the guys with guns. In a book, you can't do that. You can't just cut away. You can, but it actually impacts the read. It doesn't make it better. And so that was something to really, I had to wrap my head around was how to do that. But the great thing about books is that you really get to be a little more internal on the characters, which is something you can't do on screen without using voiceover, which can be a crutch. It can
Yeah.
be irritating. It is like you have to have it all on the screen to be most effective. So with books, you can be a little more internal.
Mhm.
You can be with the characters. They figure things out in their head. They don't need to be picking up the clue and saying out loud to someone like what this clue means. They can live in the space a little more. And it's like so much more freeing to be able to just explore the world through a person's point of view. I find that just a very satisfying way to tell stories is to lock it off to a human like that. And so I love books.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes a lot of sense in particular with Intercepts, which we'll get to the plot of that in just a second. But it is a very internal book because a lot of the crux of the issue in this book is this sensory deprivation, this lab, a lot of testing, and understanding how the kind of like internal mechanisms manifest is a huge deal in this book. And I don't know, I mean, I have some ideas of how you would visualize that on the screen, but like that opening chapter that we, start the book off with, that's one that I don't know how well you could translate that, like it's one of those things that I feel like you get that internal perspective of that character going through kind of hell and you get all these feelings and things like that without having to externalize them in a way that's, super visually stimulating. It's much more heartfelt in a way, which is a good thing and a bad thing in horror. It makes
Yeah.
your heart hurt and it makes your heart happy. But I do want to backtrack a little bit, and I want to let you go ahead and talk about the work that you're doing now, because I know that you're also screenwriting right now and you have other books. So if you want to go ahead and briefly introduce those projects and what you do now, we'll go ahead and jump into back in Intercepts after that.
So just like the trajectory of my career, I was struggling as a screenwriter, wasn't getting read. I started self-publishing books. The books did really well. And at that point, I was making, enough money, not enough to live on, but enough to say, hey, look at me. I'm a writer. I can do this. I don't need to keep churning out free scripts for Hollywood in the hopes that one day something will happen. Because that's one thing I've discovered is Hollywood doesn't like to pay you in anything but praise and promises. And so but once I had this like other career, and it was just like, and I was feeling more comfortable in that, and I had this sort of like parachute on where I was like, I can leave Hollywood right now. I don't need this anymore. Uh, I went in for one last pitch on an open writing assignment, and there was something, Hollywood's kind of a confidence game.
Yeah.
And when I had the walkaway energy, I just started taking swings and started, this is how I see the story. And I wasn't trying to guess what the person across the table wanted me to say. It was just, this is where my messed up brain is taking this idea and these characters. These are the themes I want to explore. And surprisingly, people responded to that. And I started booking assignments, and then I started getting staffed in TV rooms. And that's why I haven't had a book come out since 2020, is I've been pretty consistently working. I've been very fortunate because it's been a hard time in the industry. There's a lot of
Yeah.
contraction since the strikes happened.
Hmm.
And a lot of the people I've worked with are struggling to find jobs, but I've been very fortunate. I've been working pretty consistently, and now I wrote on two shows that are coming out in this year. The Burrows, which is
Yeah.
produced by the Duffer Brothers and
Very
has
excited for that one.
it's so much fun. It's very sweet. It's like that Amblin-esque horror with a
Yeah.
heart kind of 5. It's got Alfred Molina. It's got Gina Davis.
Oh yeah, that's lovely.
It's Alfre Woodard. It's going to be great. And so that comes out. And then Little House on the Prairie. I wrote on that, and that comes out this summer. And I know when I say that, people are like, "Oh, what kind of twisted, dark, murdery version of Little House on the Prairie is this?" And it's like, no, no, it is the Little House on the Prairie you think it's going to be. It's very heartwarming, sweet, earnest. I had a blast writing on it. I was on set in Winnipeg when we shot it, and I had a great time there. And it's exactly the Little House on the Prairie that you think it's going to be, and I loved it.
I think that even I had that knee-jerk reaction whenever I read that about you, that you had worked on both these projects. But I was just talking to somebody about this like a few days ago with romance and horror. There's a certain empathetic approach that you have to understand about writing good characters that it doesn't like they're kind of two sides of the same coin. And I think that that's that same kind of like family love or like, the tenderness of a show like Little House on the Prairie at times is also the same thing that fuels a horror story. They're just being yanked in two different directions. And I'm always curious if authors find that to be the same case. But, from the reader's perspective, it's the same emotional stakes. Just sometimes we're rooting a little bit more for happiness versus just like survival, in a horror story.
Yes, I totally agree that it is all about character. It's about humanity. It is
Yeah.
about grounding these people in real emotions. And, sometimes those real emotions are, I hope that this monster doesn't rip me apart. And sometimes those real emotions are, I hope that these girls are nice to me at this tea party.
Yes.
And both have like, can have the same sense of dread. Uh,
Absolutely. Yes. As a woman, yes, I can say that. Oh
and
man.
like when I met for Little House on the Prairie, the showrunner is Rebecca Sonnenschein, and she cut her teeth on Vampire Diaries, and then her career went to the next level when she was on The Boys.
Oh yeah.
She was an executive producer on that, and so everyone expected this again, this hard R version of Little House. But when I met with her, we both came from this genre background, this horror background, and we connected over how horror is such a heightened way to reveal character, and that we were both very excited to, uh, you know, try writing without. I don't want to call horror and scares being a crutch on revealing characters, but it does like heighten the world, and it'd be. We were excited to try it without that extra layer to it.
Yeah.
And at one point in the writer's room, she just kind of stopped and was like, "Wow." Usually in the room, I'm coming up with different ways to decapitate someone, and here we're coming up with cheese day, how to make cheese, and and it was a lot of fun. We definitely connected over
Yeah.
that.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really interesting because, horror, everything's just cranked up to 10. And so you kind of have to get in and get out with certain facts about a character in order to like keep the progression moving, the plot rolling. Sometimes you get the room to let things breathe, but not the same way as, in other genres or other mediums. So I definitely empathize with that. But I do want to go ahead and ask, since we're talking about it a little bit, like what is your relationship with horror? Like, were you always, always a horror fan, like even as a little kid? Or was this something that you discovered later in life? Like, what was that relationship with this genre like?
I was always a very scared child.
Yeah, yeah,
And I grew up on certain violent movies that I didn't like. I wasn't scared by because they just always existed. So Jaws,
yeah.
Aliens, The Thing, those movies were just always on in the background, and they went deep into my mind. But then at a certain age, like from 8 to 12 or so, I was terrified of horror movies. Didn't want to go through the horror section of Blockbuster because the covers were too scary. Uh, and so I've always been attracted to that fear, and I've always felt that fear very deeply.
Mhm.
And so when I started writing my writing journey, and I was, working with that Castle Rock team that did Harry Met Sally and Princess Bride, I was like, okay, this is where my contacts are. I'm going to be a romantic comedy writer. I'm going to do that kind of that Rob Reiner. I was working on things like Bucket List, so that Rob Reiner sort of style, and that's where I taught myself story structure was with
Mhm.
the rom-com and the cute meat, and the act one turn point, the midpoint, all of that stuff where the relationship kind of they start off as enemies and they become friends and then they become enemies again and all of that. And ultimately, I had a little bit of success in that career and I would go in, people would like a script of mine and they'd be like, "Hey, we have this idea, come in and pitch on it." And I would be like, and I was so bad at that because I ultimately did not connect with the rom-com formula. I
Yeah.
married my high school sweetheart, and so the the idea of the romantic comedy actually didn't apply to my life. For me, romance was, hey, you know what? We're having a we're having a disagreement. Let's sit down at the table and discuss our feelings. And that's
Yeah.
not good story.
No, stability is very romantic in the real world, but not in television and novels. So,
But stability also led to my fears coming out.
yeah.
And it was like, oh, okay, I'm very happy right now, which means something bad is coming.
Yeah.
And so that's when I just started to organically turn toward horror. And what I found was I could write horror stories and I could break open horror stories very easily. And because it's just where my mind goes to these dark places. How twisted can I make this human antagonist? And that I avoided that for a while and stuck with comedy longer than I should have because I was like, well, comedy is hard. Horror is easy. Writing, everyone says writing is hard. Writing should be hard. So I should be doing the hardest thing I can. I don't know why the logic went that direction, but it did for many years. And so I made writing as hard as possible on me. And then when I switched to horror, I was like, oh, wait a minute. No, no. Writing actually should be fairly easy, or at least
Yeah.
coming up with stories should be fairly easy. It should be something that you organically feel and do, and then you work very, the effort part and the hard part is the amount of work you put into refining that and crafting it and making sure that all the moments, the scenes, even the sentences are really at their peak, and that's what the effort should be. It shouldn't be like, how do I make these people fall in love and make you laugh at the same time? If that's too hard, then maybe that's not the genre I should be working in.
Yeah, it's always I what I've seen and what I've felt with like anything in the creative format is the showing up every day, the consistency, the like kind of devotion to it, and like you said, to make it its best form possible. The ideas and all that, that's all great, and anybody can have a great idea, but it's the showing up and getting it in the best place that you can to, to give to the public. But yeah, so I want to go ahead and talk about how this applies to Intercepts. I'm going to let you briefly introduce the book because I'm always very afraid of spoiling things if I try and synopsize a book. So if you want to go ahead and just briefly introduce what the book is about, we'll go from there.
So it mostly takes place in this secret government facility where people, and they call them antennas, are kept in this extreme sensory deprivation. So they can't see anything, they can't feel anything. And without your senses sort of grounding you to the world, they go violently insane. But what the facility has learned is if you do this torturous process called tuning, where you turn their senses back on and bombard it with things, these inmates can intercept the senses of anyone in the world that they're tuned to. So if the government wants to see through the eyes of a cartel leader or a terrorist or the leader of another country, they can use these inmates. And so the story is about the supervisor of that facility, this guy named Joe, and he's just this blue collar, kind of hard working guy who just does his job and has very much compartmentalized the darkness that is going on in the facility. He can rationalize it. This is for the greater good. He doesn't tries not to think about it, as does everyone who works there. Until the day comes where Joe's ex-wife dies very suddenly, and his teenage daughter has to come live with him. And then his teenage daughter, Riley, starts seeing this woman. She's having these visions, these horrifying hallucinations. And what Joe comes to realize is that the inmates at the facility have intercepted his daughter's mind and are using her to get to him.
Yeah, very horrific setup there that whenever you realize what's going on, it's pretty zero to 60 pretty quick. I do want to ask, do you remember like the initial nugget of this story, like where this began for you, and if that idea kind of remained intact or if you had different variations of this as you drafted it, like on the first go?
So I read a lot of nonfiction, and I kind of just follow my interests where they go. My wife's a professor now, so I just kind of sneak into the university libraries to work in the summer, and we'll just find a bookshelf and be like, "Ooh, this, and this all look very interesting to me." And so I'd gone down this rabbit hole about the U.S. government's Cold War sort of operations, and I read a book about the NSA and the lengths they went to for intercepts,
Yeah.
which is they're listening into foreign communications, and they would do all of these crazy things that this book, which was it's called Body of Secrets, it was written in 2001. So it's even predates the sort of Edward Snowden reveals on the NSA. So this is all just Cold War stuff. And that was just, oh my God, they would do anything in order to listen in on other people. And then I'd already known about the CIA's MK Ultra experiments into the like parapsychology and sort of the drug experiments on the human mind, that kind of stuff. And so that all sort of fused together into this idea of this world of what if we're using things like extreme sensory deprivation to listen in on people. And from there, the facility design and all of that kind of came out very organically from some of the research I did. But then it just became a question of, okay, what's the best route into this story and to tell this story? And I think the initial versions I sketched out were from the inmate's perspective. Because I think that was the most organic route to take of you have a prisoner, have a story about the prisoner breaking free. But I really, first of all, I didn't want to live the entire story inside a cell. I
Yeah.
wanted to be outside a little more. I wanted to be in the real world a little more. And I wanted the moral complexity of the guards of the facility. And so that is where the story kind of developed into that direction. And from there, it was just like the supervisor, and I started to explore his home life, and it
Yeah.
all kind of came together.
Well, I'm glad that you bring up the moral complexity because that brings me to my next point in that I'm really interested in how it felt to write a character like Joe because my reading experience with him was certainly interesting. Um, I think about sociologically, men are, supposed to be the providers of the family, and he thinks that, he's just going to work and doing his job to provide for his family and all these things. But, by seeing him both in the facility during the day and then outside of the facility with Riley and kind of handling that whole situation, we get to see like the two compartmentalizations of him, which was really, really interesting. And sometimes really angering for some reasons because, the philosophy that he applies to his own, ex-wife and child is not the philosophy that he's applying to his work life, And so that was really, it's jarring to read that kind of characterization, but it does make sense. And we know that things like this exist because I mean there's a whole branch of psychology around why there's uniforms for, for people to wear whenever they go to work in certain fields, because you dawn on that personality. So I wanted to hear from you what it felt like to write Joe because there's a lot going on with him.
Well, I've always been fascinated by things like the Stanford prison experiment, where a bunch of student volunteers were assigned either prisoner or guard, and they were just randomly chosen, and the ones who became guards went in like normal kids and then became crueler and more abusive as the experiment went on. And then also the Milgram experiments, where again, normal people, subjects just chosen, and they were given instructions by this kind of supervisor person to push this button to shock a stranger on the other side of this wall. and people just followed orders
Mhm.
to an astonishing degree of just giving a complete stranger this electric shock. And so those things have always fascinated me. And the character of Joe would have been an antagonist in many other versions of the story, like a full-on mustache twirly antagonist. And I didn't find that particularly interesting or revealing. I think I know people feel it's sort of dangerous to try to humanize your villains too much.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I kind of feel when we treat bad acts as those that are only committed by complete monsters, then it doesn't force us as humans to sort of evaluate our own role in society and the things we do and whether or not we're just going along and following orders and pushing the button. And so that's why, I wanted to find the humanity in someone like Joe. And a guy like him, like, he genuinely loves his daughter.
Mhm.
And I think that is, throughout history, there's always been these stories of these monsters who go home and, once their crimes are revealed to the world, their sons and daughters are like, oh, he was really a good dad. He was sweet. He gave us Christmas presents. Like, and that is always it's always resonated with me because I do think that like the best way that we can look at ourselves as people is to see what we're capable of on the worst end so we can avoid that. And I always push against people who are like, well, I would never. It's like, well, in the right situation, you might. And
Yeah.
so I try to find those right situations. And that's what the character Joe was. And I wanted to ground him in that family and in that very real tension of here's a man who has chosen work over family all his
Mhm.
life. He's a very hard worker.
Yeah.
And and he's rationalized that away. He's providing for his family, he's helping the country, and now that work is literally following him home. It's coming back to bite him. And because he's ignored his family, his marriage has fallen apart. And so I found that very complex, interesting character.
Yeah, there's another piece of his character that I found really interesting too, and it's, more towards the beginning of the book. When we see him introduced in the workspace, he kind of talks like with a twang. Like he's not as educated that he says as everybody else in the room, but he's still somebody who can get the job done, and he always kind of has to portray himself in a way that he feels is more eloquent or more intelligent than he believes that he is. And it was really interesting to me to kind of give that tip of the hat of his confidence level, of his like where he's at emotionally with that difference, to kind of show like how far he's willing to go to like make up in, he feels like he has something to prove. And I think characters who have something to prove are always really interesting to read about because they're willing to go a little bit farther and in all sometimes good ways and sometimes bad ways. And I'm kind of curious if you feel the same way about him and that place that he's in when we meet him.
I think, yeah, you've hit on a huge, a core part of his character is that insecurity
Yeah.
that he's always trying to overcome. And I think that is something that really fuels him, that he feels, and I think it's also very relatable. There's just this, it came from my time working in Hollywood studios, the level of bureaucracy
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
what that actually does. And everyone I've talked to in their careers, there's bureaucracy, and that is this core part of the world of Intercepts is that there's this sort of these faceless bosses back at headquarters who don't know how things are actually working at the facility and the people who make it work and that there's that frustration that the bosses don't understand. They don't get what we're doing. And I mean that's Joe. And he's trying to he'll go to great lengths to try to make up for that level of insecurity he's feeling and to try to impress those faceless bosses back at headquarters. And I think that's when you put characters in those kind of situations where they really want to impress and they want everyone to think, oh, you're really good at your job, even if that job is pretty despicable. It creates a very interesting character and one who can do bad things.
Yeah, and it feels very timely, like the kind of corporate angst I feel like we're experiencing in the world right now of this like there's a big gap between the working person and the management level. Like that I feel like is really well displayed in this book for those very reasons. And it's kind of funny though that this was written or released back in 2019, but it still exists. Here we are in 2026, so it still remains timely. But it does bring up a kind of a logical question for me. Uh, did anything change at all in the book from the self-pub version to what was released now? Like, did you have any changes that you wanted to make and you were able to, or was it just this is just a traditional publishing deal? We're taking what's, already been done and, getting it on bookstore shelves.
It is almost identical to
Yeah.
what the self-pub version was, which is great.
Yeah.
There was a copy edit pass and a few like small, if a plot hole could be plugged with one line, let's throw that line in. Why not?
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
And then there is on this new version, there's an extra bonus chapter. It's like a little short story. One of the scenes is the that happens in the book is the daughter Riley is trying to explains one of the hallucinations that she's having to her dad. And for pacing reasons, we stayed in the dad's point of view. And so that the thing she describes happen, it's very quick. And so uh, reviewers and readers have said, "Man, I wish we could have seen those scenes. They sound awful in the best kind of ways." And so that was the bonus chapter was like, "Well, let's go spend 4,000 words on this awful night the poor Riley had to go through and see how she survived it, see how she overcame it and made it through the night."
Yeah, that's a sleep deprivation and kind of that paranoia. But I mean, it's justified paranoia in her case. I mean, she's very much experiencing these things. It was tense to read those scenes. And I kind of also wanted to talk about the drama that you write in this book because it's like everything that we've been talking about has been very kind of like pertaining to the work and the horror, but there is a lot of drama between Joe and his ex-wife and Joe and Riley in their relationship. And then there's another scientist that works at this facility that there's some history with Joe. Like there's all these different interpersonal elements and sometimes I find it's a little bit hard to marry the, like really quick propulsive kind of thriller aspects with, really heartfelt characterization and drama, that feels real. So I kind of wanted to talk about that balance and you approaching some of those more dramatic reveals. I'm not going to say what they are, obviously, but later on in the book.
Well, one thing I like to do with particularly just character backstory, I like having full-fleshed characters, characters who lived in the world before the story starts,
Hmm.
and who have lives outside of the boundaries of the story. Like some of those characters, you can kind of imagine what they're doing when they're off screen, so to speak. And so I put a lot of work into figuring out those histories. I don't necessarily write them down. I'm not a, what's Hannah's favorite food kind of person,
Yeah.
but I do try to crack them and figure them out to a certain degree. And one thing I've found is when it comes to backstory, the most relatable and human, especially in a heightened world like Intercepts, is better. It resonates more. And so backstories I often pull from just people in my life, just things they've said, things they've gone through, things their friends have gone through, their parents have gone through. And so, in some ways, if I were to have written Intercepts as a drama without the horror elements, it would be, a story of a marriage breaking down, a divorce, a guy who just can't admit he's wrong, who's made some mistakes, another marriage that broke down that then coincided with his, like, and it would be very dramatic in that sense. And I think that is, what helps the book resonate.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I just try to find real things from real people to infuse into the character backstories. So the reveals aren't. aren't big. They're not like, oh, it was really the secret twin who blah blah blah. Like, no, it is like something that your friend probably went through something similar. And now imagine what would happen if that kind of history were to be exploited and then combust in this horror torture facility kind of world.
Yeah, I mean, it almost makes it worse that it's not, an outrageous. It was the secret evil twin the whole time because it makes it more relatable and therefore that much more horrific. Um, yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that that drama helps, like for me, it was another, like I just sat a little bit closer on the edge of my seat whenever those things would happen. It's just another level of, oh, we're digging in a little bit deeper. There's still this much more to lose now, now that this has happened or been revealed, so to speak. But another big crux of this book that and it's something that really happens in horror in general, and I kind of wanted to get your opinion on it, is like believability in horror, right? Like a lot of older horror, I think, was predicated upon like kids not being believed whenever they saw the weird shit in the house, right? And parents being dismissive. And there's a degree of that here, but it's mostly because they're working out what's going on. Nobody's exactly getting angry with Riley for what she's experiencing, which is sometimes not typical in horror. Sometimes the parents do get really pissed at the kids and they're like, you got to get your shit together. So believability in horror is really something that I'm interested in because I find it's shifting and it's changing. I find kind of where we're at currently in horror is we're a little bit more readily accepting of the weird and strange or whatever in the horror fiction that I read, but I'm curious how it feels for you to write quote unquote believability in the genre?
Well, one thing, and this just comes, I write stories that I myself want to read, want to consume. And so as a consumer, I get frustrated with just tell them, just believe her, sort of story mechanics. And so I don't want, as the reader, I don't want to be ahead of the character for the entire story and just waiting for them to catch up. And so, for the believability, Joe, he knows what his work is. He knows to a degree what the powers of these antennas are. And so when Riley starts having these hallucinations, now her mother did just die. So there is this other plausible explanation that maybe this is just a trauma response and he has to chase down that. And he doesn't want to, throw up red flags because of the nature of this facility and the oversight of it. And you start, saying they're in my daughter's mind, then that actually puts his daughter more at risk. And so all of that, and again, that was just grounding it in that bureaucratic government sort of black box where you don't quite know how powerful the overseers are in this scenario, or if the bureaucracy has blinded them to what's happening. So Joe does have a little bit of autonomy. And so that, he carries all of those choices with him into the story and all of the knowledge that he has about the workings of the facility and these inmates. He carries that into the things that his daughter is saying. And I think it makes him a very active character to, try to figure out what is actually happening in the quietest way to keep his daughter safe. And I think that is, and I think a lot of that believability just comes from the world of
Yeah.
intercepts and spending time to set up the bureaucracy and all of the different mechanisms they have to oversee and maintain control.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things of like once he rings that bell, he can't unring it. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube once certain things happen, especially, with people who work in the government or, like in these official capacities, that's a component of this book is like the mental health aspect. If, Riley is not well, then she may not be allowed to live with him. And then like he loses his daughter. There's that stake of it too. Which is really interesting to think about, like in the real life applicable sense for like mental health, like that's very true for a lot of people. Once you ring that bell, there's some things that are, not able to be done or explored the same way that they were once, in prior to that thing happening. So it was a lot to think about in those moments. And it really, I think honestly, that was probably some of the most upsetting stuff that I read. And this is a gory book. There's lots of blood and guts. Don't get me wrong, but I think to me, the choice of how far do we take this, to protect her and to, but also to make sure that you keep her, because that's also gutting the thought of Joe losing her. So that was a really
Yep.
tight line to walk, I feel like, in the reader's seat.
Well, and for those, especially the first half of the book where he is trying to toe that line, it is kind of him walking the same wrong paths he always has.
Yeah.
Of there's a right thing to do, and but he's trying to have it all ways. He is
Yeah.
once again compartmentalizing. He's rationalizing. He's, seeing these worst case scenarios. Oh, maybe it's nothing. Maybe it'll pass, hopefully. And, that's what he's been doing his whole job and career. So it was also keeping the consistency of that character,
Yeah.
so that the growth could happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, again, in keeping that tension and that suspense for, pretty much the majority of the novel, there's really not much of a dull moment anywhere in the book. There's really no reprieve. How does that feel like for you as a writer to kind of maintain that sense of really tight, tense, suspenseful writing? Like I always kind of joke it's like a caricature, but like, do you sit there with your shoulders in your ears for the majority of the drafting process, or, like how does it feel? Because sustainability is a really big deal in horror, right? So I imagine it's not easy to always be go go go, and this novel is pretty fast paced. So
A lot of that comes from that screenwriting background
yeah.
where the thing that I mean is this is how I trained myself to write by necessity, by
Mhm.
survival, is the thing with Hollywood is no one wants to read. They never want to read. It's homework to them. They have more reading than they can finish in their lifetime. And so when you give them a script, there's just this assumption that they are reading it during lunch with their coworkers while checking their email. And so it created this by default, I created a very linear or
Mhm.
vertical style of writing where the just had to drag their eye down the page and make sure every line of dialogue is a bit of a mini cliffhanger that leads organically into the next. Every scene is a bit of a cliffhanger. Like the just you just want to make that person who does not want to read your script not want to put it down. And so that translated to books very well. And what I discovered, I shouldn't have been surprised, but I kind of was, is that readers want to read your books. It's a very
Yeah.
different experience. They want to get lost in your books. They want to set aside all of the distractions in life and to just be absorbed in this world. And so that's where that kind of fast pace of my writing comes from. And I enjoy it. And so it's probably that pace will probably always maintain.
Yeah, no, it's unfortunately it's a little funny because I think if you don't laugh about it, you'll cry. But I get what you mean. The get in, get out, wham bam, thank you, ma'am, kind of thing. But yeah, no, it makes sense, and I think it does still make for a great novel. But I do like that you have the ability with fiction, written fiction in this way, to explore more of those things. Like you said, you were able to explore that extra scene with Riley that, in this go round that you hadn't before. And those things like, we do want those as readers. We do not want to hurry up and finish this on our lunch.
And that's why I love books. There's things in Intercepts that could never make it into a script.
Yeah.
There's uh there's my favorite parts of the book are actually things like Joe remembering when he had to go to work one day and young Riley when she was real young, like he wakes
Yeah.
up early and she had it was it was Father's Day and she had made like breakfast for him and like just things like that. And you can't do that cutaway in a movie.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of little bits of that. Joe always intending to do this. He drives past this one trailhead every time he picks up his daughter from his ex-wife's house, and they drive past this trailhead. And every time he, talks about how he wants to do that hike with her one of these days when we have time. when when it's convenient. I've
Yeah.
always wanted to do this hike. He talks about like his time in the Boy Scouts. It was this the happy moments of his life, and he wants to experience that again. And I think that's where fiction and that I try not to slow down too much, but I do feel those are the slower moments that really help you like these characters and want to see them get out of this mess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That it definitely goes a long way in building the humanity of them, especially like in this with this book when there's a lot of brutality and gruesomeness that goes on at the facility. So that makes a lot of sense. But no, I'm really, really thrilled that this book has gotten a wider release. I think that it's a really, if people are looking to get into horror and they've been reading thriller or like sci-fi. I think that this book is a really great marriage of a lot of different like subgenres and themes. So I'm really, really thrilled that more people are going to get their hands on it. But I do want to go ahead and ask you, are you working on anything else book-wise, or is it just screenwriting for you these days? I know that you said that you've been very busy this last year with two shows coming out, but I did want to go ahead and ask about the book side of things.
Uh, I'm I'm hitting pause on my screenwriting career. This re-release has given me the excuse and the opportunity to do what I've found that I've really loved.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I was a struggling screenwriter who self-published books, who then became a working screenwriter who realized that I really loved the books. And so like that's what a trajectory.
Yeah.
But I've
Funny how
I've
it works
wanted to
out.
come back for a long time because what I've discovered is with screenplays, the sort of magic of the process is also one of the hardest things creatively, and that is that your a screenplay at its core is a schematic
Hmm.
for 200 artists to use to stay on the same page to create something. And everyone on set is an artist. Set deck props, the actors, like they are top of their game, everyone. And so the end product is something that's wonderful. It's different, but it's never exactly like what was written, which
Yeah.
is fine. That is part of the process. But I, I just love being in the world of prose and fiction and getting my, being writer, director, producer essentially, where I
Yeah.
get to have my voice onto the page and, express myself to a reader. And I'm just really excited to get back to it. And so this re-release is giving me that opportunity. It was part of a two-book deal. So now I have
Hell
no
yeah.
excuse. I'm writing a book. It's going to be my take on an exorcism story.
Oh, right
It should
on.
be coming out next year.
Very, very exciting. Yeah, I imagine when I think about it, like I feel like we've been getting a lot of the behind the scenes kind of after a big series wraps. Like we got it with Game of Thrones, about making the final season. We got it with Stranger Things. Like we're getting kind of more of these behind the curtain looks at what goes on. And it always stuns me how collaborative it is. And, I am somebody, I am a control freak. I know this about myself. So I know if I'm ever going to write, it is going to be up to me and me alone. Like that world is not for me because I have I really like to be in control of things. And that's something that you just don't have. And it's probably for the best. I mean, there's a lot of great things that come out of collaboration, but I also can recognize that it's a struggle to have like your baby put it out there and like you said 200 different people are going to touch it and kind of morph it into this other thing. So I totally get it, but I'm really, really thrilled that the this area, fiction writing is where you found a lot of happiness because, I enjoyed to work, so I'm excited to see what this exorcism business is about.
Well, the great thing is that the writing the books is what when I started self-publishing, I realized that I'd fallen out of love with writing in the
Hmm.
screenwriting world, and that I'd been treating it as a chore, as this sort of. I was one of those people who would say, I hear this from a lot of screenwriters, I don't like writing, but I like having written, and that's not a good way to go about being a writer. So when I started writing the books, it was like, oh my God, I actually love writing. I
Yeah.
love this process. It's like exercise. It's, where it's hard, but then when you're done, it releases all this dopamine, and you're the next day you're like, "Ooh, I want that again." And it made me fall in love with writing, which is why my screenwriting career started doing better because you're just better when you like what you do. And that's one of the reasons I want to get back to it is it's just that pure form. And what I've discovered is in television, there's actually not a whole lot of writing that goes on. It's mostly talking.
Yeah.
The majority of my job is to sit at a conference table
Meetings. Yeah.
with 8 to 10 other people all day, and we just talk. We talk about the stories, the characters, the arcs, the plot, and I just want to get back into writing.
I totally get that. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I imagine sometimes though, being able to like bounce and collaborate in some ways is probably very helpful to like problem solve whenever you hit, like a rut, it's probably great. But also at the same time, if you're ready to rock and roll, that would also be infuriating if you're in nothing but meetings that could be emails. So totally get it.
I heard some other writer once said, I forget who, but the greatest thing about TV writing is the collaboration, and the worst thing about TV writing is the
Yeah.
collaboration.
Yeah.
And because it is great when you're hitting a scene or a moment and you don't quite know how to crack it, you don't understand it, and there's 8 other people pitching ideas, and often a pitch will land with kind of a thud on the table, but when you're good at the job, you just keep going, and eventually one hits the table, and everyone's like, wait, and then you get this weird bump set spike thing of just like people piling on the idea and getting all excited. And it
Yeah.
is so cool, so beautiful that things come out of that. But then there are times where you're like, I have it so clear in my head. Why won't you people let me write this? Why are you pitching new things at me? It's in my head. I just let me get to the page.
Yeah, no, I think I know exactly what you're talking about, so I totally understand that. But man, I'm really, really thrilled that, you found the joy in writing again because there's nothing like, falling out of love with something that you really care about. But I'm really, really thrilled that Intercepts has gotten a wider release. I think that people are going to have a lot of, I hate to say fun because it is horror, but it is, with how fast paced it is a bit of a fun ride. Thank you so much for coming on the show to talk all about it. What is there anything else that we can promote or plug for you that's going on this year? Like any other like book event appearances, anything to do with your shows? Like, what can we promote for you?
I am starting a social media presence, is something I'm very uncomfortable with, but I have an
Yeah.
Instagram and TikTok under tj.payne.author. Payne is spelled Payne. Uh,
I'll get,
and
yeah.
so come give me a follow and see what I come up with. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll get those linked in the show notes of the episode so people can keep up with you for whenever the next thing comes out. But thank you so much, TJ. It's been an absolute pleasure. Intercepts is on shelves now. Everybody should go pick up a copy and just thank you so much again.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was great.
A huge thank you to TJ once again for coming on the show to chat about his novel Intercepts. It is widely on shelves and available now. If you're looking for a very fast paced kind of sci fi thriller horror crossover kind of a novel, then Intercepts is definitely for you. Also, as he mentioned, he worked on The Burrows, which is now streaming on Netflix. I've sat down and watched the first episode, and I need to finish watching the rest. I was having a good time with it while I was watching it, but I do need to sit down and finish up. Thank you all so much once again for listening, for promoting the show, and for all my Patreon folks. Thank you so very much for participating every week in the Discord and just making such a fun little community out of this little niche in the internet that we have carved. So thank you all so much. I will be back next week with even more author interviews. But next week is StokerCon. I will be there. So if you see me walking around, please come say hi. I'm super friendly. I don't know whether or not I am approachable. Sometimes I just feel like I'm a chaos agent. So just come say hi. I'll have stickers. So if you want an Anna Rose Reed sticker, come find me. Thank you all so very much. And I will see you all next week.